It was a warm Saturday evening, and the Johnson family was in high spirits. Marcus Johnson, a 42-year-old financial analyst, had planned this dinner for weeks. His wife, Vanessa, a 39-year-old elementary school teacher, had just finished a stressful school term and was looking forward to an evening of relaxation. Their two children, 15-year-old Jaden and 10-year-old Ava, were excited. Jaden for the chance to try a new steak dish he had read about online, and Ava because she loved any excuse to dress up and go out. The Johnsons were a close-knit family, built on love, respect, and a strong sense of pride in their heritage. Marcus was a man who believed in dignity above all else. He had worked tirelessly to give his family a comfortable life and teach his children that they belonged anywhere they wanted to be. Vanessa, a passionate educator, always emphasized kindness and self-worth to her students, and, of course, to her own children. Jaden, a bright and confident teenager, was growing into his own person, learning to navigate the world with the lessons his parents had taught him. He was aware of racial biases, but had always been taught that education and excellence could overcome them. Ava, still innocent to the harsh realities of the world, saw every outing as an adventure and was always eager to make new memories with her family. That night, as they stepped out of their family car and walked toward the restaurant's glowing entrance, they were filled with anticipation. Marcus had heard great reviews about this place, and they had dressed accordingly, expecting a pleasant, upscale dining experience. Little did they know, their evening would take a turn they never expected. The restaurant, La Belle Vie, was one of the newest and most talked-about spots in town. Known for its elegant ambience, candlelit tables, and gourmet cuisine, it attracted an elite crowd. The Johnsons had chosen this place to celebrate Vanessa's accomplishments and enjoy a rare evening out together. As they stepped inside, the air was filled with the scent of sizzling steak and freshly baked bread. A soft melody played in the background, and waiters in crisp uniforms moved gracefully between tables, serving well-dressed patrons who chatted in hushed voices. The decor was modern yet inviting, with dim lighting casting a golden glow over the room. Marcus approached the hostess stand with a polite smile. "Good evening. We have a reservation under Johnson for 4, he said confidently. The hostess, a young woman with blonde hair pulled into a sleek ponytail, glanced at her screen. Her expression subtly shifted, but she quickly covered it with a professional smile. "One moment, please," she said, before disappearing toward the back. Vanessa exchanged a glance with Marcus, sensing something slightly off. She had been to plenty of high-end restaurants before, and this wasn't the usual check-in process. Jaden and Ava, oblivious to the tension, admired the luxurious decor. "This place is fancy," Jaden whispered to his sister, who nodded in agreement. Minutes passed, and the hostess did not return. Other guests who arrived after them were seated promptly, yet the Johnsons remained waiting. Marcus cleared his throat and approached another staff member. "Excuse me, we've been waiting for our table. We have a reservation," he said, maintaining his calm demeanor. The waiter hesitated. "I'll check for you," he said, but something about his tone felt dismissive. Vanessa's grip on her purse tightened. Marcus was not a man who jumped to conclusions, but he had experienced enough subtle discrimination in his lifetime to recognize when something was off. He could feel it in the way the staff avoided direct eye contact, in the hushed conversations happening behind the hostess stand, and in the way other diners cast glances their way before quickly looking away. Vanessa noticed it too. "Maybe they overbooked," she whispered to Marcus, trying to give the benefit of the doubt. But she wasn't convinced. Jaden, however, was beginning to pick up on the situation. "Why is it taking so long?" "We had a reservation," he said, frustration creeping into his voice. Before Marcus could respond, the hostess returned, her smile now forced. "I'm sorry, but we're actually fully booked for the night. There must have been a mistake with the reservation system." Marcus blinked. "That's strange, because I confirmed our reservation this morning," he replied, his voice firm but controlled. "I understand, sir, and I apologize for the inconvenience," she said, her tone rehearsed. Jaden's eyes flicked toward the dining area. "But there are open tables right there," he pointed out. Indeed, at least 3 empty tables could be seen from where they stood. The hostess stiffened. "Those tables are reserved for VIP guests." Silence hung between them. Vanessa, feeling a knot form in her stomach, took a deep breath. "So, You're telling me that after confirming our reservation, we now don't have a table, but others who came in after us do? She asked, her voice dangerously calm. The hostess didn't respond right away. Again, I do apologize. Before she could finish, another group entered, two well-dressed white couples. They approached the stand and, without hesitation, were led to one of the reserved tables. Jaden's jaw clenched. Ava, still young and naive, tugged on her mother's sleeve. Mommy, why did they get to sit down? Vanessa felt her heart break a little at the question. Marcus inhaled sharply, forcing himself to remain composed. Let me speak to the manager, he said, his voice carrying the authority of a man who would not be dismissed so easily. The hostess hesitated but nodded, disappearing into the back once again. The family stood there, now painfully aware that all eyes were on them. Some diners looked away in discomfort. A few whispered amongst themselves, but no one said anything. Vanessa squeezed Marcus's hand. We shouldn't have to beg for a meal, she murmured. He nodded. We won't, but we won't be ignored either. At that moment, a man seated near the bar discreetly pulled out his phone and hit record. Minutes passed before a tall, broad-shouldered man in a sleek navy suit emerged from the back. His name tag read, Richard Coleman, General Manager. His expression was neutral, but his eyes carried a flicker of annoyance as he approached the Johnsons. Good evening, sir, he said, addressing Marcus while barely glancing at Vanessa or the children. I understand there's been an issue with your reservation? Yes, Marcus replied, his voice even. We had a confirmed reservation for 4, but your hostess just told us you're fully booked, despite the open tables we can see right there. Coleman clasped his hands behind his back. I understand your frustration, sir, but unfortunately, we are at capacity for the evening. Vanessa folded her arms. Then how did those guests who just walked in get seated immediately? Coleman barely hesitated. They're longtime patrons, part of our VIP membership program. Jaden scoffed. That's convenient, he muttered under his breath. Coleman's eyes flickered toward the teenager, and his lips pressed into a thin line. I assure you, there's nothing personal about this, he said, the forced politeness in his voice barely masking his condescension. But it feels personal, Marcus said, standing firm. We made a reservation like everyone else. We arrived on time, dressed appropriately, and have waited patiently. Yet, we're being turned away while others are seated. So tell me, what makes us different? Coleman's posture stiffened. Sir, I don't appreciate what you're implying. I'm not implying anything, Marcus countered. I'm stating a fact. And the fact is, we're being treated differently. My family deserves an honest answer. By now, more patrons were watching. Some whispering, others looking uncomfortable. The tension in the air was palpable. That's when Coleman's patience snapped. I have the right to refuse service to anyone. If you're unhappy with our policies, I suggest you take your business elsewhere. A stunned silence fell over the room. Vanessa's breath caught in her throat. She had experienced microaggressions before, subtle dismissals, awkward stares, but this was different. This was outright rejection. Ava's small hand clutched her mother's dress. Mommy, why is he being mean? Jaden clenched his fists. So that's it. You're just going to kick us out. Marcus exhaled sharply, restraining his anger. He wasn't going to let his son see him lose control. You know what? We don't need to stay where we're not wanted. He turned to Vanessa, who nodded, blinking back tears of frustration. Without another word, he placed a protective arm around his children and began leading them toward the exit. As they walked past the tables, the Johnsons could feel the stares burning into their backs. Some guests looked down at their plates, unwilling to meet their eyes. A few had the decency to look ashamed, but no one spoke up, except for one voice. This isn't right, a man near the bar muttered under his breath. His phone was still recording. Coleman, however, wasn't done. If you leave now, I ask that you don't return, he called after them. Marcus stopped in his tracks. He turned slowly, locking eyes with the manager. Trust me, he said, voice low but firm, we won't. With that, the Johnson family stepped out of the restaurant, humiliated but dignified. As the Johnsons disappeared through the doors, the man at the bar lowered his phone. His name was Ethan Carter, a local journalist who had witnessed the entire ordeal. Something about the scene disturbed him deeply. The cold dismissal, the way the family had been treated as if they were unworthy of basic respect. Ethan had been debating whether to step in, but instead, he had captured everything on video. And now, Watching the smug expression on Coleman's face as he returned to his office, Ethan felt a surge of resolve. He turned to his friend sitting next to him. "Did you see that?" he asked, shaking his head. "Yeah," his friend muttered. "That was ugly." Ethan exhaled. "I think the world needs to see this." With a few swipes, he uploaded the video to his social media with a simple caption. "This is what discrimination looks like in 2025. A black family, with a confirmed reservation, was just refused service at La Bellevue. Watch for yourself." Then he hit post. He had no idea how fast things were about to explode. By the time the Johnsons arrived home, the incident still weighed heavily on them. Vanessa tried to distract herself by putting Ava to bed, but her daughter's innocent question lingered in her mind. "Mommy, why was that man mean to us?" Meanwhile, Marcus sat in the living room, scrolling through his phone in frustration. He knew discrimination still existed, but experiencing it firsthand, seeing the disappointment in his children's eyes, was something else entirely. Jaden, sitting across from him, suddenly let out a sharp breath. "Dad, you need to see this." He turned his phone around. The video Ethan Carter had posted was blowing up online. Within hours, it had amassed over 500,000 views and was rapidly climbing. The comments section was a storm of outrage. "This is disgusting. That family did nothing wrong. Boycott La Bellevue. Racism has no place in 2025. This manager needs to be fired immediately." Imagine explaining to your kid why you weren't allowed to eat just because of your skin color. Heartbreaking. Marcus exhaled, rubbing his temples. "I knew it was wrong, but I didn't expect this much attention." Vanessa walked in, concern on her face. "People are reaching out," she said, holding up her phone. "Journalists, news stations, everyone wants a statement." Jaden grinned slightly. "Looks like people actually care about what happened to us." But as the numbers continued to climb, so did the backlash. Not everyone was on their side. For every supportive comment, there was another trying to downplay what had happened. It's their business. They can refuse service to whoever they want. Maybe the family was being aggressive, and we didn't see that part. Not everything is about race. Maybe they just overbooked. I've eaten at La Bellevue for years. They're not racist. The backlash was frustrating, but what shook the Johnsons most were the direct threats. "Stop playing the victim, or we'll make sure you regret it. You people always make everything about race. Hope you enjoyed your 5 minutes of fame, because it won't last." Vanessa clutched her phone, her fingers trembling. "Marcus, this is getting serious." He nodded, jaw clenched. "I know, but we can't back down. We didn't do anything wrong." Despite the threats, support continued to grow. Celebrities, activists, and even politicians began calling for a boycott of La Bellevue. Ethan Carter's video was now on the front page of multiple news outlets. And then came the moment that changed everything. Under growing pressure, La Bellevue finally issued a public statement on their social media pages. "We regret that a misunderstanding occurred at our establishment. La Bellevue has always prided itself on excellent service and an inclusive atmosphere. We do not tolerate discrimination of any kind. However, we must clarify that the Johnson family was not refused service due to race, but because of a clerical error regarding their reservation. We apologize for any confusion this may have caused." The statement backfired immediately. Within minutes, thousands of comments flooded their page. A clerical error? Then why did the manager say they had the right to refuse service? If it was an error, why were other guests seated right in front of them? This is not an apology. This is gaslighting. Nice try, but we saw the video. The Johnsons were treated unfairly, and you know it. Ethan Carter himself responded. "I recorded the whole thing." The manager wasn't confused. He was dismissive and aggressive. This excuse is pathetic. As the backlash intensified, La Bellevue disabled their comments section. That move only made things worse. Hashtag Boycott La Bellevue began trending worldwide. Influencers and high-profile activists called out the restaurant's weak response. Some even shared their own experiences of racial discrimination in the food industry. Major news outlets picked up the story. Reporters began showing up at La Bellevue's doors, demanding answers. Customers canceled reservations. The restaurant's rating plummeted as thousands left one-star reviews. Inside their home, Marcus watched it all unfold with quiet resolve. "They thought they could silence us," he muttered. "Now, the whole world is watching." But just when it seemed things couldn't escalate further, a former employee came forward with damning information. The next morning, A former waitress from La Belle Vie named Samantha Torres did a live interview. "I worked there for 2 years," she said, her voice shaking. "I left because I couldn't take it anymore." When asked what she meant, Samantha took a deep breath. Management routinely turned away black customers. They had this unwritten rule. If a black family came in without looking important, they'd find a reason to refuse them. It was disgusting. The interviewer leaned in. "Are you saying this was a pattern?" "Absolutely," Samantha nodded. "I saw it happen dozens of times. And when employees tried to speak up, we were told to shut up or find another job." The internet exploded. Now, it wasn't just about the Johnsons. It was about systemic racism at one of the city's most high-profile restaurants. As the scandal grew, one thing became clear. La Belle Vie wasn't just facing public outrage anymore. Legal consequences were coming next. As the allegations against La Belle Vie gained traction, the restaurant found itself under intense scrutiny. News outlets dug into past complaints, uncovering a disturbing pattern of racial discrimination spanning several years. Former employees came forward with similar stories. Customers recalled feeling unwelcome but never having proof. Now, the proof was undeniable. The Johnsons watched the chaos unfold from their living room, their faces illuminated by the glow of the television screen. A breaking news segment played. The viral video of La Belle Vie refusing service to the Johnson family has ignited a national conversation on racial discrimination in the restaurant industry. With testimonies from former employees and mounting legal pressure, the restaurant is facing boycotts, protests, and potential lawsuits. Marcus leaned back in his chair, exhaling. "I didn't think it would get this big." Vanessa, still holding her phone, nodded. "We were just trying to have dinner as a family. Now, it's like we've become part of something bigger." Jaden scrolled through Twitter, shaking his head. The manager, Kevin Wallace? He just deleted all his social media. Vanessa narrowed her eyes. He's running from the consequences. But he couldn't run for long. The next day, La Belle Vie released a second statement, this time much more serious. Effective immediately, Kevin Wallace has been terminated from his position. "We deeply regret the events that transpired and are committed to improving our policies to ensure this never happens again." It was too little, too late. Kevin Wallace became the face of racism in the restaurant industry. His name trended online, memes flooded the internet, and investigative journalists uncovered past complaints against him. The final blow came when a civil rights organization announced a lawsuit against both Wallace and La Belle Vie. They alleged discriminatory business practices and violations of civil rights laws. Wallace tried to defend himself in a TV interview, but it only made things worse. "I was just following standard protocol," he claimed. "I never intended to discriminate against anyone." The interviewer didn't hold back. "So why were black families repeatedly turned away under your management?" Wallace fumbled, unable to answer. The clip went viral, further sealing his fate. That night, as Marcus scrolled through the news, he turned to Vanessa. "We didn't just stand up for ourselves. We exposed something much bigger." Vanessa squeezed his hand. "And maybe now, fewer families will have to go through what we did." But the real turning point came when La Belle Vie made a shocking announcement. Facing plummeting revenue, mass cancellations, and growing legal trouble, La Belle Vie made a drastic decision. They shut down indefinitely. The news broke on social media. Due to ongoing controversy and financial struggles, La Belle Vie will be closing all operations effective immediately. "We apologize for the harm caused and will be reevaluating our company policies moving forward." The Johnsons sat in stunned silence as the headline flashed across the screen. Jaden whistled. Wow, they actually shut down. Ava, who had been listening from the couch, looked up at her parents. "Does this mean they won't be mean to people anymore?" Vanessa smiled softly, pulling her daughter close. "It means they can't hurt anyone else like they hurt us." Across the country, reactions were mixed. Some people celebrated the closure, calling it justice served. They deserve this. You can't treat people like that and get away with it. One less racist establishment in business. Others argued it was too extreme. People lost their jobs over this. It wasn't their fault. This went too far. An apology should have been enough. But for the Johnsons, this wasn't about revenge, it was about accountability. And soon, they would realize just how deeply their story had impacted people. In the weeks that followed, the Johnson family's story became a symbol of resistance against racial discrimination. News stations, social media influencers, and civil rights organizations continued discussing the case, using it as an example of why accountability was needed in the restaurant industry. What started as a humiliating night out turned into a national conversation. Vanessa was invited to speak on a talk show about the experience. As the cameras rolled, the host asked, "How does it feel knowing your family's story has made such an impact?" Vanessa smiled, glancing at Marcus, who sat beside her. "At first, we just wanted to make people aware of what happened to us. But now, we realize it's not just about our family. It's about every Black family that has ever felt unwelcome, disrespected, or denied service because of their race. No one should have to experience that." The host nodded. "And what do you hope comes out of this?" Marcus leaned forward. "Real change. If restaurants and businesses know that they'll be held accountable, maybe they'll think twice before treating people unfairly." The audience erupted in applause. By the time they returned home, Marcus and Vanessa had received dozens of messages from people who had gone through similar experiences. Some shared their own viral videos, while others simply thanked them for speaking out. Their story had become a movement. Meanwhile, the legal case against La Belle V moved forward. Several former employees testified that Kevin Wallace had a history of racial bias, reinforcing the discrimination allegations. When the settlement was announced, it was another major headline. La Belle V to pay damages and implement anti-discrimination policies after lawsuit settlement. The restaurant, which had remained closed for weeks, underwent new ownership. The new management publicly promised to rebuild the restaurant with inclusivity at its core. As for Kevin Wallace, his career in hospitality was effectively over. When a reporter tracked him down, he looked like a defeated man. "Do you regret what happened?" they asked. Wallace sighed, avoiding eye contact. "I didn't think one decision would ruin everything. But I guess I made a mistake." It was a weak apology, but it didn't matter. The damage had been done, and the world had moved on without him. Despite everything, the Johnsons never let the experience define them negatively. One Saturday, Marcus suggested something unexpected. "How about dinner at that new spot downtown?" Vanessa raised an eyebrow. "You want to eat out again?" Marcus smiled. "Yeah, I think we should." The kids cheered. That night, they stepped into a different restaurant, one where they were greeted with warmth and respect. As they ate, Vanessa looked around at the diverse crowd and the friendly waitstaff. This was how it should be. When their meal ended, Marcus left a generous tip. Jaden grinned. "Making up for the last time?" Marcus chuckled. "Something like that." The Johnsons walked out, heads held high, knowing they had helped spark change. Justice had been served, and so had their dignity.